CB 106.6 FM.
So time to meet our panel of candidates across parties and constituencies. In alphabetical order, standing for the Conservatives in Batley and Spen, Imtiaz Ameen is a solicitor. He's previously stood for his party in Blackburn against the then Foreign Minister, Jack Straw. The Respect candidate is George Galloway, once a Labour MP, now leader of Respect, who has been an MP first in Bethnal Green and Bow, and most recently as MP for Bradford West since 2012. The Lib Dem on our panel is Ed Sanderson, another solicitor, he's standing in the Leeds East constituency. And for Labour, Naz Shah. Naz is a women's rights campaigner who has been selected to stand in Bradford West for her party. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the panel. BCB's Arwa Almari is in the audience this evening for us. Arwa, are they all behaving themselves so far?
I think so, yeah. We've got audience as far as the eye can see, and everyone is ready to engage healthily in this debate. So, and we're going to move into our first questioner, who is Mukhtar Ali from Bradford. Mukhtar Ali, just a bit of a background, is an activist from Bradford, and he was a former Labour councillor who left the Labour Party on the back of the Iraq War. Mukhtar Ali, what is your question to the panel today?
With the growing discontent, disconnect and mistrust with the political system and politicians in this country, what would you do to engage and empower all communities in our society so that this can be an inclusive society?
So the question is, disconnect between political elite and the general public.
Thank you very much. We'll let George Galloway take that one first.
Well, you have to say what you mean and mean what you say. And if you are a politician like that, you will get a response. But if people know that you are just a kind of human pager who passes on a line which is different from the line yesterday and will be different from the line tomorrow, if you're just an automaton who will be a sheep going through the lobby of the House of Commons, you're not likely to excite much in the way of enthusiasm. You are a good example. You, like me, were in the Labour Party for decades, and you left. I was expelled because of a crime so gigantic that it's strange now looking back at it 12 years on, 1 million dead people on, and Iraq and Syria and Yemen and Bahrain and Libya, most noteworthy in the news today, all of them in flames in a kind of disaster. And that was done by politicians. It was done by Labour politicians who, with George W. Bush, formed the most grotesque coalition in all history, the Blair-Bush gang. And of course, it's not only Labour. The reason why students are unlikely to save Nick Clegg in his constituency in Sheffield is that he signed in blood that there would be an abolition of tuition fees. Instead, there was a tripling of tuition fees. So you have to say what you mean what you say. I firmly believe that people are not apathetic about politics. They're apoplectic about the pathetic nature of the political class, with some exceptions.
Let's get Naz Shah's thoughts on that.
In answer to your question about how to engage, I'm not a career politician. I'm an activist by background, and I still continue to be that, and I absolutely endeavour to continue to do that work in the community, regardless of the election. And I think that speaks volumes. When you actually engage with people on the ground, when you actually work with families, with young people, with older people, you know, I chair a mental health charity. I've done lots of work in the community on other levels. I think that engagement has to be meaningful. You have to be able to sit with people and talk to them. And I think politicians, there's an air of you're different to us. And I think for my part, and the part that I'm going to play is about real engagement as part of the community, and I think that's really, very different. I think people, you know, you can have empathy, but to be able to relate to people, people need to find connecting things that connect you with them, and I think I have a lot of that. So that's how I do it, using my community development background.
Ed Sanderson, give us a Lib Dem view.
Well, the Lib Dem tradition has always been based in community politics and listening to voters' concerns on a community level. And I think there's been a perception amongst all parties that politicians and the political class don't listen to voters. It's not that voters aren't interested in politics or political issues, because of course everything that affects voters, from the amount of money that in their back pockets every month to the state of the environment to the transport system, clearly affects them. It's just that politicians aren't seen to be able to listen or want to engage or speak the same, almost the same language as they do. So politicians need to return to being servants of the people, and that means doing the right thing for voters. And I think all parties need to learn from that, from across the political divide.
Imtiaz Ameen.
I think there's a disconnect because there are fewer and fewer conviction politicians nowadays than there was, say, perhaps even 20 years ago. So if you go back to, for example, the late 80s, and you had, whether you liked her or disliked her, you had someone like Margaret Thatcher, you knew exactly what she stood for. On the left, you knew exactly what Labour Party stood for. And at the moment what's happened, and it's partly because fewer and fewer people are voting, that all the political parties are targeting the same group of voters. So we often hear the centre ground is where all the votes are. And all the parties are pitching to a smaller and smaller number of voters because they feel that that group of voters will swing the election. And the reason that group of voters will swing the election is because the wider public is not voting. And unless everybody decides and takes the view that regardless of which party I vote for, I am going to go and vote, you will continue to have this type of targeting of voters using fancy software, and every party has them. As far as empowerment is concerned, it's one thing saying we have to listen to the public, we have to engage with the public. These are cliches we hear on a regular basis. Empowerment will only take place when the issues that are relevant to the public are discussed by politicians. So, for example, in where we are, you had with George Galloway, you had a very surprising result a few years ago because the language being spoken appealed to a certain number of voters. And I think it's the same message across the board, regardless of which party political background you come from. If a politician speaks your language, deals with the issues that are important to you, you will engage with that politician. But it's a two-way process. You can't continue to say, oh, the politicians don't listen, they don't engage. Politicians do listen, they do engage. But it is a two-way process where the public has to say, this is what's important to me, what are you going to do about it?
Just like to get a show of hands, actually, on a couple of points raised there. I know the fact that you're all at a political debate shows some kind of connection to politics. But is there anybody in the room who does feel particularly disconnected with politics at the moment? Yeah, I do. Only a smattering. Who said I do? We'll let Arwa come in and ask you why.
Yeah, I feel disconnected. I've been voting for over 50 years now. And in all that time, the politics have stayed the same, whether it's local or national. What is happening now is a kind of mini revolution within local and national. And I don't think that's such a bad thing, but what I am concerned about is that the way that it's put over nowadays is not to encourage people to vote, it's actually confuse them. Because what is in there for the youngsters nowadays is nothing.
Thank you very much. Any of the panel want to agree, disagree?
I would make the point that the clear winner of the sort of presidential style debates that we've had has been Nicola Sturgeon of the Scottish National Party, a party that stands only in Scotland, which is standing therefore for the breakup of Britain, and yet she's taken the debates by storm. Why? Because of the pathetic nature, the three cheeks of the same backside of the mainstream parties, and because she's given them a spanking on television. And it's really set the whole thing alight. Now, don't get me wrong, I hope she comes a cropper. But the reality is, she's shown up the other politicians because she's the only one there saying, scrap nuclear weapons, spend the money at home. We need it spent on our health service. Stop bailing out the bankers. Spend the money at home. Our pensioners need to be kept warm in the winter time. Stop this austerity. It's killing us. It wasn't us that caused the crisis. It was the bankers what did.
I want to get in there, George, if I may.
They're getting billions.
I just want to get the other people's points of view on how their leaders have performed in the various interviews and debates that we've seen. Ed, you seem very keen. Assess Nick Clegg for us.
Well, Nick Clegg, of course, wasn't invited to the last opposition
but the debates he's been in, how would you assess those?
The debates he would have debated. I thought he performed very well. Where I would agree with George, I mean, this is different from ideology. I think where Nicola Sturgeon has performed very well is increasing the membership of the SNP and seeing that as very important in the political process. Now, clearly, I don't agree with her ideologies, but what I think all the establishment parties could do better, and include the Liberal Democrats in this, is using voters and involving them more within the political party itself and the political process itself. And you see the reason the SNP have become so successful, and they're making great strides, particularly in Labour heartlands. There's a high chance you may actually see more Conservative Scottish seats in the next after the general election than Labour seats. We never thought we'd say that. Is because the SNP have at least, and I say I don't agree with a lot of their policies, have at least been able to identify that voters want to participate in the political process themselves. Now, that doesn't mean running for election, that means getting involved in membership and getting involved in policy. Now, the Liberal Democrats do get our members involved in policy, but I think we could as a party do a better job in terms of in getting people involved in terms of becoming members.
I want to keep this on the party leaders just for now, because I want to talk about David Cameron, and I will get Imtiaz Ameen's thoughts on how David Cameron has performed so far.
I think he's performed very well. I mean, it's easy in opposition for someone like Nicola Sturgeon to say, I want X, Y and Z, 190 billion of uncosted commitments. It's a lot more difficult when you have a record to defend. And
especially that record.
It's a good record. It is a good record. Unemployment is down by... we've increased employment by 2.2 million. More jobs have been created in Yorkshire. More jobs have been created in Yorkshire than the whole of France, and we have spent £8 billion more. We've actually spent £12 billion more on the NHS in the last 5 years. We have a good record. The economy was in an absolute mess 5 years ago. £150 billion of deficit. And it's all well and good saying we don't. It's all well and good saying that we don't want any austerity, but how do you continue to spend at the rate that the Labour Party was spending and expect to fund your public services? So I think what David Cameron has said in the debate and what he said on the interviews is absolutely 100% correct. We had a job to do, we've done that, we're in the right direction, and we need to continue in that with the economic plan that we're on.
Okay, Naz Shah, Ed Miliband.
I'd beg to differ on the economy.
Well, tell us about
plan.
Ed Miliband.
I think Ed Miliband's faring pretty well, and I think from a leadership perspective, I mean, I spent the afternoon, I was very privileged to spend the afternoon with Ken Livingstone, who came up to support me yesterday afternoon, and his words were, since John Smith, he's the best leader we've had. From a leadership perspective, I think he's absolutely on top form. I also disagree with, for every 4 jobs you've got in London, we've only got 1 up in the north, so that's absolutely statistically correct. So we haven't got those jobs, Imtiaz. We haven't got them up in the north in Yorkshire, and I don't think that devolution has happened. And it's not on your you're way off mark in terms of meeting your economic plan, because you're 3 years off it. You said you'd meet the deficit in 5 years.
Continue to tell us about Ed Miliband. We'll try and revisit that particular statistic later. But as far as he is performing in these debates and he's coming across,
I think he's coming across very congruent. He's coming across as a strong leader. It's exactly what the Labour Party needs to take us through 2015.
You're listening to BBC Radio Leeds. I'm Richard Stead from BBC Radio Leeds.
And I'm Marwa Al-Mari here from BCB 106.6 FM, where the audience have just questioned the panel. And our next question is from Idris Azhar from Halifax, who is a freelance actor and is 30 years old.
The main question I want to ask is, how are you going to be able to help, obviously, communities to engage together as a whole, obviously for young voters to come forward and vote when there's a lot obviously going on in the world itself at the moment?
Ed Sanderson.
Well, particularly in terms of young voters, one of our policies is to extend the franchise to 16. We think that's very important in terms of getting... we've seen how successful it was in the Scottish referendum, how many 16 to 17-year-olds voted. We think if you're old enough to get married, to pay tax, to have sex and to join the army, you should be allowed to vote. And surveys have shown that if you are engaged at 16 and 17, that continues to the ages of 18 and 24, which is the key issue. I think our electoral system needs to change. I think if people realise that their vote counts for more, and we have a proportional system, they're more likely to vote as well. If you vote if you vote in a safe seat, there's no entitlement to vote. So that's, in terms of citizenship, I think that's very important. But I think that's a lifelong commitment that we need to make. I think more money should be ring-fenced and given to local councils to improve adult lifelong ideas of citizenship as well. And leadership, again, is the question I'd repeat, the answer I'd repeat before. All political parties and the media as well have a role in promoting the positive impacts that politicians and the public service make in general, but also listening more to voters and workers' groups as well.
Let's find out what Labour are doing to engage. Naz Shah.
In terms of citizenship, I think we agree, and I agree with Ed, in terms of lowering the voting age. I think it's absolutely right that young people use their voice. I think it's absolutely right, if they're paying their taxes, they should be entitled to have that civic participation. I think there's a task to be done to strengthen communities, strengthen young people's education in terms of political engagement. And I think from a leadership perspective, let's be clear, leadership is on every single seat. Leadership isn't about top-down, it's about creating, a good leader creates more leaders, and we have leaders in our schools, we have leaders amongst our young people, the future leaders, and the future lies in the hands of our young people. I think it's absolutely imperative on a personal level. I will be very, very actively engaging with young people. In terms of democracy, why are we not giving those young people that right? Why are we not at the moment? If we were in power, we would be one of the first things we would be doing is lowering that voting age, and rightfully so.
I think we're going to have a bit of a debate on the actual lowering of a voting age in just a moment. George Galloway, on engagement.
Well, look, we've got a parliament full of expenses thieves, some of whom should have gone to prison but went instead back to their cabinet positions. We have a political class under a cloud of suspicion of the darkest, most vile kind. Establishment cover-ups of foul, perverse crimes. We have a political leadership that has led us into one war after another. David Cameron, with Ed Miliband's support, bombed Libya to bits, and the Italian Navy are now having to fish the pieces out of the Mediterranean Sea. How can you engage with people when that's the quality of the political leadership that you have been giving them? The crimes of Blair were bigger, of course, but longer ago. Although he's still around, of course, and my film, The Killings of Tony Blair, will be premiered in this very city of Bradford in a month or two from now. But the political leadership in Britain is simply incapable of rising to the challenge that faces our people. Our people are atomized. You talk about a community, but there's actually now no British community. We have people who are deliberately setting out to divide us on the basis of colour, on the basis of faith, people seeking votes by dredging the barrel of prejudice against Muslims, for example, Trojan horses, Trojan hoaxes, every kind of racist filth is dredged up by the British media in support of this or that part of the political class.
How do we engage though, George? How do we engage?
Said, well, let me tell you, the gentleman in the second row said, we need a peaceful revolution in this country. That's exactly what we need. We need to throw out these political charlatans and get real change.
George, thank you. Imtiaz, Ameen, Conservatives, how do we engage with voters?
Can I say that answer probably explains why we have a detachment with politics. When you brandish every politician as corrupt or as an expense thief, you do yourself no favours. There are people who are doing a lot of good work in Parliament, and to call them all and group them and say that they're all a bunch of crooks, and it does the politics and the system no favours. The way you engage with people, and especially young voters, first-time voters, a person who's 16 or 17 needs to understand that they're going to go to university, then they're going to be looking for a job, then they'll be looking for a home. They have to take some individual responsibility. It's all well and good saying, well, no, the system doesn't work for us and we're not interested. If you are looking for a career, if you're looking to buy your own home, if you're looking to get involved in your own community, you can do that by getting involved in the political process. It's easy to detach yourself saying, well, they're all the same, no one makes any difference. Well, you can make a difference. Get involved, make a difference.
Well, let's get someone who maybe is. Who's going to be a first-time voter this time round? May 7th, who's going to be voting for the first time? Go speak to one and just ask how connected they feel.
Well, the first hand I saw going up was here. So what's your name, sir?
My name's Niall.
How connected do you feel as a first-time voter?
Yeah, so far, definitely, like, there's been plenty in the media about it. That's where I'm getting most of my information. But in terms of Bradford West, which is the constituency I'm in, the candidates are pretty much on the ground, and I've met a few of them already and gotten their side of it. So I feel fairly connected. But also, you know, this is my first election that I've been able to vote in here. I do have an interest in politics, so I am going out and trying to find out information.
Thank you, Niall. You're listening to BBC Radio Leeds. We're at Bradford College's Dye House Gallery for the second of our election debates. It's on first-time voters and how we engage people in politics ahead of the general election 2015. Our panel, all candidates for their respective parties in West Yorkshire at the general election, are, just to remind you, Naz Shah for Labour, Ed Sanderson, Liberal Democrats, George Galloway, Respect, and Imtiaz Ameen from the Conservatives. Let's take another question from the floor, please.
So our next question is by Simran.
Hi, I'm Simran. I'm a member of the UK Youth Parliament. My question is, politicians preach a lot about equality, they preach about justice, and they preach about liberation. Can you tell me why your party is still denying the vote to 16 and 17-year-olds, but not in terms of including it in the manifesto, but the time it is taking to pass it through Parliament? Because it's a campaign that's been running for 3 years, and it really should have been, and it's just by now.
If I can just put that as a direct question, firstly to Naz Shah. Naz, would you support lowering the voting age to 16?
Absolutely. I feel strongly that young 16, 17-year-olds should be able to vote. I think for now, if somebody turned 18 in after the 7th of May, they'd have to wait 5 years to vote in the general election. I think that's absolutely absurd. I think if you can tax people, then why shouldn't they be part of the decision-making process of who runs their councils and who runs their country? I think it's absolutely right that young people should be allowed to vote, and we will lower the voting age if we are successful as a government.
Imtiaz Ameen, if elected, would you support lowering the voting age to 16?
I'm not convinced that. I've not heard any strong arguments to say that a 16-year-old should be allowed to vote. Just because you pay tax, I mean, people do part-time work when they're 12. Are we going to say that? Are we going to allow them to vote? So I don't think that I've heard a convincing argument yet to support the lowering of the voting age to 16. At the moment it's 18, you go to university. I think it's an age where you get engaged in the political process. I mean, I'm quite happy to leave the voting age at 18.
George Galloway, do you support lowering the voting age to 16?
Well, we wouldn't want Imtiaz to link the right to vote with the paying of taxes, because that would rule a lot of your chums in the city out of the voting process. You can get married, you can join the army, you can work, you can leave school, you can work and pay tax at the age of 16. You should always have been able to vote at 16.
Ed Sanderson, Liberal Democrat. Would you support lowering the voting age to 16?
Well, Imtiaz's answers just summed up the frustration we had, because if it wasn't for the Conservatives' opposition, it would already have been policy under this coalition government.
Couldn't the Lib Dems have done that anyway?
Well, we pushed very hard, but we were blocked by the Conservatives. You know, it was something we really would have wanted to push through, but they dug their heels in. You know, we tried, but we couldn't do it, unfortunately. So yes, I mean it's been our policy for decades to have votes at 16 for the reasons given already. I think no taxation without representation is a centuries-old philosophy, and it should apply in the UK as well. And this is almost this catch-22 situation. You've got to have a democracy to increase voter interest and voter.
Thank you. Yeah. So that's. In fact, just give me a moment, because I want to bring the audience in, because I think you've all had your say on whether it should be lowered to 16. So 3-1 on the panel. Let's have a show of hands. Who would lower the voting age to 16 in our audience, and who wouldn't? So an overwhelming majority, it is fair to say, in the audience here in Bradford this evening would support lowering the voting age to 16. Simran, do you want to just come back on that, seeing as you asked the question on what you've heard from our panel?
Well, I think in terms of my point of view, because as the UK Youth Parliament, we've been campaigning on this issue for 3 years, and the Conservatives really need to open their eyes, because 16 and 17-year-olds are labelled as immature, as irresponsible, and look how many young people are here today. I definitely don't see this as a sign of disengagement, so I definitely think that Conservatives really need to open their eyes.
Simran Jandu with that question there.
If those who put their hands up could keep their hands up again, we've got a hand up here. Why do you think it's important that the voting age should be lowered to 16?
If you're going to university, 16 and 17-year-olds, they're the ones who are applying for university. Surely if the 16 and 17-year-olds had a voice, the Conservatives would hear that voice. And if they had the vote, maybe there would have been a strong push for the Lib Dems and their Tory chums to not raise the uni fees.
Thank you. You're listening to BBC Radio Leeds. It's our election debate here in Bradford this evening. Questions from the floor as we discuss engagement, young and old first-time voters ahead of the 7th of May and the general election 2015. And let's get our next question now, please, to move us on our.
So our next question is by Mike Brown. Mike Brown is a civil servant from Bradford. And Mike, if you could ask your question, please.
Hi, what could be achieved if the MPs of West Yorkshire work together to help the region?
What could be achieved if the MPs of West Yorkshire work together to help the region? George Galloway.
Well, I pledged my backing to Jerry Sutcliffe, my parliamentary colleague for many decades, but a Labour MP. I pledged my support for him as the head of a supercharged, turbocharged West Yorkshire devolved authority, just like the one that has been given to Manchester. And I think Jerry Sutcliffe, as a Labour man, a real Labour man, would be the ideal person to lead that. And we absolutely need that. We're not just being left behind so far as the south is concerned, we're also being left behind so far as the north is concerned. And Manchester, if we're not careful, will become another London. And we here in the Leeds-Bradford conurbation will be the losers. So I've said before at Hustings, we need to get our act together, to be campaigners united for that super authority. And for me, the airport, as was joked earlier, is called Leeds-Bradford. We need that hyphenation. You know, in the United States, Dallas-Fort Worth, St. Paul's-Minneapolis. We need to be Leeds-Bradford, and we'll all be better off if we can unite around that programme.
Let's get Naz Shah's thoughts on Northern Powerhouse, I guess is the phrase. Does the Leeds-Bradford and wider West Yorkshire area need to be a Northern Powerhouse?
Absolutely. I think it's really, really fair and just that we do have devolved powers. And if we had a Labour government, certainly we would be devolving 6 billion through the LEPs. We would also be having regional banking structures which would support the growth of local businesses. So I think if we did have, and it depends, in terms of a question was, could we achieve together? If we return a Labour government on May the 7th, when we have those powerhouses, when we have that 6 billion, when we have the regional banks, there is nothing stopping people from working together. I think, united, we are a stronger voice to make sure that we bring the investment where it's needed. We have two of the most deprived wards right here in Bradford. I think it's fair. I think it's absolutely right that we join forces and argue the case for the resources where they matter the most in terms of education. At the moment, we don't have that resource. We have had higher cuts in that north-south divide is so real. We have growth, what people don't know what to do with down south, and here we have cutbacks at over £200 per head in comparison to less than 50. So yes, I think we could achieve a whole great deal.
We're talking working together, something that the Conservatives and Liberal Democrats have had to do over the past term. Ed, how do the Lib Dems work together with the other MPs of West Yorkshire to help the region?
And it's something Lib Dems have done in councils before as well, so we're no strangers to coalition even before 2010. Lib Dems are committed to the idea of localism, of devolution, of bringing power as close to its local people as possible, because we're best placed to make decisions that affect our education, our health service, the issues that matter to most. We take a still different stance from West Yorkshire, though. Our Yorkshire Liberal Democrats believe that we should have a Yorkshire Parliament elected for the whole of the Yorkshire region, but that should have exactly the same power as the Scottish Parliament does in Holyrood. So that's with tax varying powers, that's with control over health and education. Because we have the same population as Scotland, we should have the same size economy as Scotland, and we should be able to fight for Yorkshire interests. I agree with Georgie's worrying that there's not just a north-south divide, there may well be a north-west Yorkshire divide as well, and I think Yorkshire as a whole county, not just West Yorkshire, should come together, and we should share the skills that they have in the Humber, share the skills they have in South Yorkshire, as well as the agricultural skills they have in North Yorkshire, to all come together and build a lasting Yorkshire Parliament, but with real sustainable powers.
Imtiaz, Ameen, what could be achieved if the four parties represented here tonight and others work together to help the West Yorkshire region?
Well, working together obviously helps, but I mean, some of the proposals we just heard there, that's not going to help. That's just adding a layer of bureaucracy to what we have already. But we already have the West Yorkshire Combined Authority, which the government has funded to considerably. The West Yorkshire Transport Fund now has £1 billion to distribute in our area over the next, I think, 10 odd years. We've got HS2 that's going to be linked here. That's going to bring in approximately another £1 billion worth of growth. 18,000 jobs are going to be created as a result of that. A £500 million economic investment fund has been set up here. So a number of projects have already been set up. We're not starting from zero. We have got considerable growth in our area. As I said previously, more jobs have been created in Yorkshire than the whole of France. So a number of positive economic outcomes have already taken place. Working together is great, but that sort of proposal, let's have a Yorkshire Parliament, or let's have another layer of bureaucracy and more in pretending that it's devolution, it doesn't work, and it's not going to work.
Manchester, why is it okay for Manchester?
The councils are working with the government in Manchester much better than the councils in West Yorkshire are engaging with the government. I think the local, you have.
Tell us more.
Well, you have councils here who are working with the government in terms of the West Yorkshire Combined Authority. But there is more that needs to be done. You need to engage with your local authority, with your local councillors, and say, look, what are you doing for our communities?
Imtiaz, it's a contradiction you just can't hold. You cannot hold a contradiction of Manchester's engagement and Bradford's not engagement, or Leeds' not engagement. It's just not doable.
You're not answering the question. What about the fact that £1 billion...
Can we all just make our points individually, please? Let Imtiaz answer Naz's question.
You seem to be completely overlooking the fact that we have a West Yorkshire Transport Fund of £1 billion. HS2 is coming. 18,000 more jobs are going to be created. £1 billion in growth.
15 years
No, it's not 15 years from now.
Half the people in here will be dead by that time.
Just while we're discussing this point,
can I just finish off?
Yeah,
It's over a period of 15 years. Hopefully, George, I won't be dead in 15 years. I'm not sure about you.
Let's keep this on topic.
But what I'm saying is that a considerable amount of money has been invested in West Yorkshire, which the panel seem to be conveniently forgetting and thinking, well, we seem to have no money here. If you work together, if you have the right people elected, that fund will increase.
Let's get the view of the audience. Let's first go back to Mike Brown, who actually posed the question. Mike, what have you made of what you've just heard?
That the Conservatives are disconnected and have no connection with people in Yorkshire whatsoever.
You're listening to BBC Radio Leeds. We're in the Dye House Gallery in the Lister Building at Bradford College. It's the second of our election debates. And let's take another question now, Arwa.
So our next question is a recorded question by Lorna Gledhill from Leeds, who sent this question for us.
Hi, my name is Lorna Gledhill. I'm 24 and I live in Leeds. I'd like to ask the panel this. In current debates around the election, it feels as if the issues that matter most to young people are not being fully addressed. For example, whilst immigration ranks as a key topic of concern for the general population, young voters do not register the same anxiety about it. Are politicians ignoring the fact that they should be looking towards a politics of tomorrow and not a politics of yesterday?
Imtiaz Ameen.
The politics of tomorrow, not of yesterday. I think the central theme of this election debate, as far as I am concerned, is the economy. Unless you have a strong economy, you cannot fund your public services, you cannot discuss education, you cannot discuss the NHS. The starting point is a strong economy. If we go back to 2010 and the politics of just taxing and spending and ending up with a huge deficit, we're going to end up again where we can't fund our public services. The reason there's been an element of austerity is we had to balance the books. We had to reduce the deficit. We had to reduce the deficit year on year to ensure that the economy works.
And you haven't done it.
We are on our way of. We have reduced the deficit by a half as a percentage of the GDP. In 2-3 years' time, that deficit will have disappeared.
Can we just ask you if you want to make a point, we'll try and get to you. But as I said previously, it's shouting.
The alternative is that you go back to Ed Miliband and Ed Bowles. And look what they did in 2010.
Imtiaz, how are we looking towards a politics of tomorrow, not a politics of yesterday?
That is the politics of tomorrow. Your choice is very simple. Do you want a competent government who's going to do well with the economy, or do you want to go back to 2010? Because the reality is there's only going to be two people who are going to be Prime Minister, David Cameron or Ed Miliband, supported by the SNP. And to be honest with you, Ed Miliband, if he fell over his shoelaces, we wouldn't laugh because he's that sort of character. So your choice is very clear. If you want to look to the future, if you want a strong economy, a vibrant economy, more growth, more money is being spent on the NHS and on public services, you vote Conservative. If you want to go back to taxing and spending, you vote for Ed Miliband.
Well, Naz Shah is representing Labour. The question is, should politicians be looking towards a politics of tomorrow, not a politics of yesterday? Our question from Lorna, and your answer for her, please.
I think it's really, we can't ignore why we're in the crisis, and I do take issue with the point what we did in 2010, because let's face it, the banking crisis was not down to the Labour government, it was a banking crisis. And let's be clear, let's also be clear, in terms of the bankers' bonuses or the banks being taxed or the bank, those rich offshore accounts are more Tory friends than they are Labour's. Let's also be clear that the Tory government could have closed down lots of loopholes in terms of a tax evasion that's going on, but you have refused to do that. So you could have brought that deficit down, you could have brought billions into the economy, but you haven't done that. You've sat on your laurels and thought, you know what, let the rich get richer and at the expense of the poor. That's what's happened in this last government. We have another 5 years of the Tory government, and you haven't balanced the books. So whilst Ed Miliband might not tie his shoelaces, I'm not sure David Cameron could do the strap-ons, but hey-ho, you know, let's... your 3 years, and that's the 3 years that you're saying with your fiscal, with your manifesto, which is not fiscal. We are saying we are not borrowing, we are not committed to any more borrowing, we will balance the books, we will keep the NHS, we will repeal the Health and Social Care Act, we won't privatise it through the back door, which is what's happening at the moment. So do you know what? In terms of looking at today, we need to protect what is there. We need to look after the NHS. We need to make do with the sanctions that you've put, which penalise the poor, the most which have affected. Let's abolish the bedroom tax. Let's tax the mansions. Let's tax and levy the tobacco companies. Let's bring in money where we should be bringing it in from, and not penalise those that are already at risk of being penalised and already live below the poverty line.
Naz, thank you very much. I want to move on to Ed Sanderson. Ed, how are you and the Liberal Democrats going to answer the question posed by Lorna from Leeds?
Yeah, I mean, the question was how we focus on the politics of tomorrow rather than the politics of yesterday. I think the politics of yesterday revolves a lot around personal attacks, and I think a lot of personal attacks, particularly around Ed Miliband, you know, whether about you can tie your shoelaces or not, or whether you can eat a bacon sandwich is you know, quite frankly disgusting. I think the discussion on the debate on immigration is also, I'm speaking, I think, as the youngest person on the panel, but I hope I speak for everybody in the room, just out of date and has no place in certainly speaking for anyone really of my age group as well. I don't like how both the Conservative and Labour Party, people who, Labour Party in particular, which used to be a progressive party, now says in stony faces that we must talk about immigration in a very very conservative with a C way about it. People of my generation, or young people, want to know that we can invest in a greener future, a future where civil liberties, including LGBT rights, are protected. And
Ed, thank you. I want to ask the same question to George Galloway. Are politicians ignoring the fact that they should be looking towards a politics of tomorrow, not a politics of yesterday?
Well, it's pretty embarrassing, I must say, as listeners will already have concluded, the kind of nonsense we've just been listening to. The Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats have put us through 5 years of austerity hell, and they're still borrowing more money than they were when they started. All this guff about the deficit and so on, you're borrowing more than you were when you started. And we have all about us the ruin of your austerity policies. You have cut taxes for the richest people and cut services for the poorest people. And the question from Lorna is a very powerful one. Young people are not talking about immigration. It is not high on their list of priorities. It's people like you, oddly, that are trying to make them fear immigration, fear immigrants. It's people like you who are going to plunge us in 2 years into a referendum that might lead to us leaving the European Union with the loss of hundreds of thousands of jobs in this area. And yet no young person wants to leave the European Union. Virtually none. You could take a poll here. No one in their right mind wants to leave the European Union. But you're making it an election issue. And Naz, you weren't in the Labour Party in 2010. You only joined it 12 months ago. I was in it for 36 years. 36 years. And I was in Parliament when the banking crash occurred in 2008. And I warned them then that giving hundreds of billions of pounds to private banks was not the answer to the crash.
George, I want to cut in because I want to ask the audience, I want to ask them the same question, and we'll hand over to Arwa for that.
So I wanted to ask the audience if there's any young person here and who has strong views about the EU membership, whether they want to be in or out. We've got a hand here, thank you.
Lily McTaggart, I'm from Bradford East. Yeah, I think it's really important we stay in the EU. We're facing more and more global crises like global warming, like climate change. And unless we work together on those issues with as many countries as possible, we're never going to be able to face them. So it's not just about economics, it's about global issues like the immigrants as well drowning in horrible conditions in the Mediterranean. We've got to work together. We can't just bail out on that.
If I could just get a quick fire run through the panel. If we're talking about engagement, we're talking about young voters, the one topic that is top of the list, in your opinion, for young voters?
Education and jobs.
Why? Naz?
I think education in terms of young people, university, coming out of colleges, having technical, what we're proposing is technical degrees. What people don't have is jobs at the moment. There's no businesses out there. Under the last 5 years, we've lost so many people, so many businesses, so many job losses, and it is a real concern. And that if you have a young person who has a job, that affects their well-being, mental health, all of it. It really, the income is a massive issue.
Ed, we're quick fire here.
Yeah, further education, particularly apprenticeships. We've already doubled the number of apprentices in the past year, 90% of which lead to full-time jobs. We want to do even more in the next Parliament.
George?
Well, Labour introduced tuition fees for all the students listening, and the Tories and the Liberal Democrats trebled them. Labour presides over Bradford schools, which are second bottom of the National League, 154th out of 155. So don't look to any of Tweedledee, Tweedledum or Tweedledee and a half, because they don't have the answer.
Imtiaz, Ameen.
The most important thing that a young person should be looking towards is a job. If a person goes to university and cannot find a job, he feels that the 3 years have been wasted, or if a person does an apprenticeship and doesn't find secure employment. And that is why we have made absolute priority to ensure that youth unemployment has come down. There are more jobs now than there has ever been. A person going to university is more likely to find a job after graduation. 2 million apprenticeships have been created in the last 5 years. We're committed to creating another 3 million apprenticeships. So the security of a job and that allowing them to buy their own home, and that is the priority a young person should have.
Thank you.
I think
Thank you. No, we've tried to keep it very brief on that point there. Let's take another question from the audience, and Arwa.
We've got Dave Forrest here with a question. What's your question, Dave?
My question is about university tuition fees. And is it right that students are forced into £44,000 worth or more of debt when we know that 73% of them will never ever pay it back? How will your party solve this issue?
We are in a college as part of the university here in Bradford. Lots of students in our audience. Ed Sanderson from the Liberal Democrats.
No, I don't think it's right, and I think the Lib Dem leadership made a huge mistake, not just politically, because obviously we've suffered at the polls, but I think practically. I was a candidate at the last election. I signed the pledge as well. I would have voted against the government in the way that other MPs did. Not enough MPs did. I believe in free education. University for university students, we weren't allowed to. We weren't able to do that, and I think it was a huge mistake. What we should focus now is on the issue of affordability. Now, this isn't a justification, this is an explanation. Of course, there's no money to pay up front for tuition. And of course, you start earning money back only once you earn £21,000. I have to say, Labour's plan for 6,000 fees, it sounds like a fee reduction. Effectively, and the question hinted at this, because you don't have to pay back all of the £9,000 unless you start off on a very high salary, Labour's plan for £6,000 tuition fees actually represents a tax break for very high earning graduates.
Well, let's get the Labour point of view, because I'm very mindful of the time. Naz Shah, tuition fees.
We have pledged to cut them by £3,000, and we will implement that as soon as we are in government. Let's be clear, at the moment it's 44,000. If we reduce that to 6,000, the average debt will be 21,000. Looking at the statistics at the moment, over 20 years, we have a debt of 261 billion at the moment, which the government will end up footing. So let's give some relief, and let's give people a chance to actually get on the job market and repay some of that. And let's be clear that people don't have to pay that back until they're earning a certain amount. So there is a system in place. So you won't be asked to pay back so much if you're only earning £10,000 a year, for example.
George, no, if we can just get the responses of the panel first, please. We can come to the audience in a moment, but I just do want to get the responses of the panel. George Galloway, what is Respect's view?
Mathematics is obviously not Naz Shah's strongest point. Neither is history. I never went to university. I worked from the age of 16 to send Blair and the other new Labour leaders to university entirely free of charge, and gave them a student grant to enjoy it with. And as soon as Tony Blair got into power, he kicked that ladder away from this generation and from their children. I voted against the introduction of tuition fees. I had a stand-up row with the Labour chief whip, who said to me, it's only £1,000. I said, it's the principle. If we've got money to spend on nuclear weapons, on invading other people's countries and setting them on fire, we've got money to pay for the education of our children. Labour wants to cut them down to 6,000, which Naz thinks will halve them. In fact, it's a third. And the Tories and the Liberal Democrats will continue them at 9,000. Respect says the government, the state, the taxpayer should pay for education for our children and for the children at university.
Imtiaz Ameen, your views, Tory views on tuition fees, please.
Our policy is that they will remain at £9,000. It funds the universities. It funds the universities, and it ensures that the universities are able to provide the best services. We're competing in a global economy. We have to fund our universities so that they're able to compete. The policy of reducing tuition fees to £6,000 that Labour is seeking to introduce will help the richest graduates, not those at the lower end, because the amount, as the questioner has just said, 73% will not be repaying their debt. Those who are earning the least amount, those graduates who are earning the least amount, will not be repaying their tuition fees. And I think we have to be serious about this, in the sense that if we are going to compete globally, we're going to have to fund our universities, and it also gives responsibility to the students that they are having to pay for their education is something they should value.
Well, let's hear from those students, because Arwa from BCB is with us in the audience. Can you just find us a couple of students just to get their thoughts as we start to wrap up on tuition fees, please?
We've got a student here. Would you like to say your name?
Jonathan. To encourage people to succeed in life is the lesson we want to teach them. We have to do that. We have to put them in massive debt.
But there are more students going to university now. Very briefly, despite the £9,000 fees, there are more students going to university than ever before. So that hasn't discouraged students from going to university.
Why don't we scrap Trident and scrap the tuition fees? Wouldn't that be a better thing? To have the best universities free of charge to our young people? Well, let's have a referendum on that. Let's ask the people in a referendum. Do you want nuclear weapons, or do you want £9,000 a year?
I want Ed's opinion. I want Ed's opinion. We've got 20 seconds literally each. Ed.
Yeah, there's more pupils from disadvantaged backgrounds going to university, and there's more pupils from black and ethnic minority backgrounds going to university. So although I've said I don't think it's right to put people in debt, the new policy isn't putting people off from going to university.
Naz, brief word finally on this.
First of all, we have to balance the books somehow, and that does in terms of a university cost. And I think in answering the young person's question there, would we have cutbacks in the university facilities? And from a Labour perspective, no, we wouldn't. What we're doing, we'd finance this through extra taxes. So it wouldn't be that we'd cut university benefits in any way, shape or form. So no, we would be cutting them back. And in an ideal world, yes, we would. But let's at least get that 3,000 knocked off, and let's get a Labour government
Let's get
in power.
a final word on this and a final word on tuition fees from someone in the audience, please.
Yeah, we've got Diane here. Would you like to tell us your thoughts?
I'd just like to know, Ed, how on earth can you say that more people from disprivileged backgrounds have got into education when you've removed EMA, not just you, but the Tories? None of you stood up to actually, you've stopped people from the poorest incomes being able to go into education, and not only have you done that, you've then whacked them with a £9,000 fee. I don't agree that the Labour Party should be at 6,000. It should be free education for all. Knowledge is power, and that's how we overcome you.
Right, OK, we'll get Ed's response to that, and then we really are done for time. So, Ed, finally, just respond to that, please.
I'm saying that because it's the truth. There are more people from disadvantaged background going to university. I mean, I know you might not agree. You might agree with the statistics. The Liberal Democrats would introduce other ways to make it easier to get into education. For example, we'd give a 2/3 discount for all 16 to 20-year-olds off bus bus travels. But there's the facts. I mean, if you don't agree with the facts, it's
Ed,
up
thank
to
you very much indeed, and thank you for all your questions as well. That's about it from the second of our BBC Radio Leeds election debates here at Bradford College. I'd like to say a big thank you to all our panel: Imtiaz Ameen from the Conservatives, George Galloway from Respect, Ed Sanderson of the Liberal Democrats, and Naz Shah, Labour. Thanks to you for listening here on BBC Radio Leeds, and a particular thank you to our audience here in Bradford. We do have another general election debate next week. Liz Green and a panel in Halifax as you debate the health service. I'm Richard Stead, and from all of us here in Bradford, goodbye.
The General Election 2015 on BBC Radio Leeds and BCB 106.6 FM.
Thank you to Richard there, chairing that debate in Bradford. Richard Bratt with you in the studio tomorrow morning between 9